Hello cruel world, my name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. President Joe Biden turns 80 this November, and there's a theory that he has dementia. There's also numerous clips of him on the internet stumbling over words, acting bizarrely, even apparently trying to shake hands with somebody who is not there, an imaginary person. So this video is my opinion on the question, does Joe Biden have dementia? And I'll be speaking from my clinical experience. So I've diagnosed and I've treated some people with dementia, unlike some other YouTubers who are who are counselor educators. And I'm also going to review some clips of Biden and give you my opinion on whether those indicate dementia or not. On top of all of that, I'm going to explain to you what dementia is and the difference between Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. And also I'm going to tell you how I would personally assess Joe Biden if he attended one of my memory clinics. I'm also going to educate you on how dementia is assessed and how it is treated. So sit back, relax, set your brains to learn, and welcome to A Psych for Sore Minds. Okay, let's start from the beginning. What is dementia? So people wrongly assume that it's just a problem with your memory, but it's more than that. It's a syndrome. It's a collection of symptoms. So it's also about your cognitive processes and your social activity. In dementia, people have impaired judgment, and in severe cases, they might do things like typically leave the bath running, or they might leave a door open, might forget where they live. They're quite vulnerable to be exploited to con men, for example. But one of the key things that you cannot miss out, and one of the crucial parts of diagnosing dementia, is that they have a lack of problem-solving ability and reasoning. So they can't carry out a basic series of tasks, like make a cup of tea. So they'll get like kind of flustered and a bit overwhelmed with what they need to do next. Dementia is common in older people, obviously, so around 50% of people over 71 have dementia, and that risk doubles every 5 years from the age of 60. As I said before, it's not all about memory, but memory is, of course, a key component, especially short-term memory, so things that have happened very recently as opposed to long-term memory. So to illustrate the difference between the two, long-term memory is things like you recalling the name of your first aardvark, the eye colour of your first crush, the worst haircut you ever had. Remember that time when you dyed your hair because you wanted to look like Eminem but ended up looking like Ellen. And short-term memory is like, sorry, I'll come back to that. So even though this is not official, from my experience of working in old age psychiatry wards, so I specialise in criminal psychiatry, but as a trainee I would work in these old patient wards, people with dementia tend to fall into two categories. There tends to be some who are kind of passively disorientated, so they kind of keep themselves to themselves, they're kind of content in their own little world, but if you ask them basic questions, they really struggle to know what's going on, who they are, they're disorientated. And unfortunately, there's another category of people who I would say are very anxious. So because they don't know what's going on, because they can't calculate what's been happening recently or how they got where they were, they tend to be like really distressed. So I can think of several patients who would literally wait next to the door and constantly ask me like when their husband or when their child's going to collect them, and I'd reassure them that, you know, they're here for the long term and that their family knows about that. And it's really sad to see because they'll be reassured for a few seconds or maybe a minute, and then they'll go back into their kind of ruminating of anxiety. Okay, moving on. So there's often dementia gets conflated with Alzheimer's, and people often mistake them as being the same thing. And that's because about 3/4 of all dementia is Alzheimer. But Alzheimer's is a specific disease. So it's caused when two abnormal structures called plaques and tangles damage and kill nerve cells. So plaques are deposits of protein fragments called beta amyloids that build up in the spaces between nerve cells, as in, give me one more protein plaque and F-rap, you can have it back. And tangles are twisted fibers of another protein called tau that builds up inside those same cells. So just to illustrate the fact that not all dementia is Alzheimer's, the second most common type of dementia is vascular dementia. So vascular dementia is when you have a lack of oxygen because you have either a clot in the arteries, or you bleed in the brain. So your brain cells literally don't get oxygen. And it's usually caused by mini strokes. And just to very sort of quickly show you that they're different disorders with slightly different presentations, vascular dementia tends to happen stepwise. So Alzheimer's is a gradual decline in cognitive function over time, whereas vascular dementia happens, it worsens after a stroke. So people suddenly get worse, like literally overnight, and then stay the same for a long time, weeks, months, and then deteriorate again. Vascular dementia is associated with like a family history of heart conditions, high blood pressures, high cholesterol, etc., etc. Okay, so now that's enough of the background. Let's get to the most interesting question. Why do people suspect that Joe Biden has dementia? Well, I think that's because there have been many separate instances where he said the wrong cabbage so that his entire Selfridges doesn't make Louis sense. Now, I'm not denying that that has happened. There's loads of examples of him doing that on the internet, but I also think that it has been misjudged and has been claimed, some of his behaviour has been claimed to be that of dementia when it isn't actually that. So in this research, something that kind of struck me as a little bit unusual is that Sky News Australia seem to really be going for this narrative that Joe Biden has dementia. Struth, mate, why you guys? So let's look at a couple of clips and then I'll tell you what I'm talking about. Let's go.
We'll always honor the bravery and selflessness and sacrifices of the Americans who served. I will once more return to the hallowed ground of 𝐭𝐲𝐻 to honor 6 million Jewish lives who were stolen in the genocide and continue, which we must do every day, continue to bear witness. To keep alive the truth and honor of the Holocaust, horror of the Holocaust, honor those we lost.
תודה לנשיא המדינה ולנשיא ארצות הברית. Thank you, President Herzog and President Biden. ועכשיו, קהל נכבד, honored guests.
The president is not well, and that's genuinely very sad. Watch as he twice tries to shake the hand of someone who isn't there.
תודה לנשיא המדינה ולנשיא ארצות הברית. Thank you, President Herzog and
It is so sad, but it is also more terrifying.
Okay, so having seen those clips, I'll tell you my interpretation as somebody who's assessed people with dementia. I'm not convinced that Joe Biden was trying to have a handshake with somebody that wasn't there. I think he was kind of turning around and signaling somebody because he was looking for direction. So he was looking for one of his members of staff to like come over and show him where he was. I don't think he actually thought there was a person there. And I do think he made odd comments. He lost the right words, definitely. I think that's true. He said horror instead of honor. No, so he said honor instead of horror. But that isn't dementia. That's just somebody being flustered with their words. Possibly somebody with poor vocabulary. Maybe slight short-term memory loss. Maybe even at a push, the earlier signs of dementia, but that's not full-blown dementia. It could just also be somebody with poor speaking skills, a poor orator. And to be fair, you'd expect presidents to be better at that. But let's not forget, in 2016, a certain ex-president said, "I'm going to cut taxes bigly, and you're going to raise taxes bigly." And nobody thought that he had dementia, but he used that word. That's like as if he had the vocabulary of a 5-year-old. Actually, you know what? That's not fair. That's not fair. I take that back. That is a very horrible thing to say about 5-year-olds. So what I'm saying is, from the evidence I've seen, I don't think Joe Biden has dementia. He might have stumbled on some words, but there's no evidence of a major lack of functioning. So for example, there's other allegations of him wandering around the White House, not knowing where he is going. And I think that's exaggerated, because if he was literally so unwell, if he had dementia to that degree, he would barely be able to function at all. He wouldn't be able to hold down a conversation. Everybody around him would be sort of bundling him in and out of rooms constantly. He would need to be watched all the time. I can't see how somebody with that level of cognitive decline could exist in the White House. And I'm making the assumption, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm making the assumption that there will be systems in place, such as the Vice President, Kamala Harris, stepping up. And I think if he was that unwell, it would be too obvious to cover up. And what would be the logic of covering it up? Because he might lose his position as the president, but the party or the people around him wouldn't lose power. So why would they cover it up? Unless he was such an egomaniac, he was so maniacal and he had this hunger for power that he literally didn't want to give up the power. But then if he was that demented, he probably wouldn't even be able to force his will upon other people. So what I'm saying is, it could be a gradual cognitive decline and it could eventually turn into dementia, but I don't think that Joe Biden has dementia. Another question, and I think another fair argument, is Joe Biden too old to be president? As I said before, he's turning 80 this November, and the average 80-year-old would probably be unfit to be in a position of great authority. So how many 80-year-old CEOs do you know? Having said all that, right, the Queen is 96, and she was definitely still doing regular public appearances at 80. The Pope is 83. The Rock is 50, and he's still tossing baddies from a plane to be hit by another plane mid-air, and he's still driving cars off the freeway on top of a train whilst it was on fire. Not the car, whilst he was on fire. So I guess the point that I'm trying to illustrate is that there's a wide range of cognitive and physical abilities, and there's 80-year-olds can present in different ways. So as in my career as a psychiatrist, I've certainly assessed 80-year-olds who are very, very ill. Some are in wheelchairs, not necessarily because of cognitive problems, but because, arthritis, etc. Some of them are actually very fit and they don't even look 80. Okay, so I've got a question for you at Psych for Sore Guys and Gals. What film did I nick that quote about the plane from the other plane mid-air? Obviously I paraphrased a little bit. Let me know if you know. Answers in the comments section below. So, just to summarise, in my humble opinion, unless there's a massive cover-up, which is unlikely but not possible, I think Joe Biden is probably okay to be president, but he's on the cusp. What I would say is the next president is due to be sworn in on noon on January the 20th, 2025, by which time Biden will be 83, and I think it's fair to say he'll almost certainly be too old for it then. Okay, let's change tact a little bit. Next question. If Joe Biden came to my memory clinic, what would I do? How would I assess him? How would I treat him? I want to tell you this because I want you to educate you. I want you guys, my viewers, my beautiful, beautiful people, to start thinking like a psychiatrist. That's why I make these videos. And also to try and take over the world, but we'll get to that. So when I was a junior psychiatrist, I used to help a consultant in a memory clinic in Essex. This is about 13 years ago. So these are exactly set up to diagnose or explain memory problems, including dementia. So how do they work? How do they function? How would I assess Joe Biden? Before I answer that, I just want to introduce you to this channel. This is a Schmeich for Small Minds. It's got a smorgasbord of videos related to some related to mental illness, some related to offending, sometimes crossover between the two. I've done videos on Jimmy Savile recently, on R. Kelly, on Boris Johnson, psychoanalysing them schmucks. I am your favourite London-based gold-tooth Indian forensic psychiatrist, or at least in your top 3. I implore you to subscribe to this channel. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it guarantees that you'll never get a parking ticket ever again or your money back. Okay, back to the video. So before Joe Biden actually arrives in clinic, he already would have had blood tests. So why? It's because even though there's no blood tests that show dementia, there are blood tests that show other things that can cause similar kind of symptoms. So for example, reversible issues with low vitamins, hypothyroidism, so when your thyroid hormone is low, that can cause memory problems. So Joe Biden might not even have dementia, he might have those things. They can be fixed relatively easy with medication. Having said that, I have to say that from my experience, blood tests very rarely actually revealed an issue. It never revealed an explanation, maybe 1 or 2 cases out of working there for a whole year. So it's just done to rule other things out. It's not actually that likely to be that helpful. And the next thing that we would do is a memory test, known, when you're trying to sound clever as a psychiatrist, as a neuropsychological assessment. So the one we used to use in the memory clinic, the one I would use on Biden, is the MMSE, Mini Mental State Examination. So it has 30 marks altogether, and it measures focus and it measures concentration, attention. So I'm not going to go through it all, but just give you a couple of examples. One of the questions is to spell the word world backwards. Then you'll tell Joe Biden 3 objects and then ask him to remember what they are and repeat them at the end of the assessment. You get him to follow basic instructions, like you say to him, take this piece of paper, fold it in your right hand, put it on the floor. Just see if you can remember and if you can sequence those things. The one thing I'd say about the mini mental state examination is, just like your teeth after too much ice cream, there is a high sensitivity. What I mean by that is it's a very easy test. So it's not like an intelligence test. Most people will score 30, and you have to be quite unwell for you to drop marks. And the cutoff point is 24. So you have to have a poor cognitive function to be diagnosed with dementia. Right, the next step is I do an MRI brain scan of Joe Biden, because that might give us some information on the brain's blood supply. Remember, I was talking about vascular dementia. Were you paying attention, kids? And also scans might pick up other rare problems that can cause memory problems like brain swelling or a brain tumour. Then after all those investigations, finally I'll meet up with Joe Biden in person. Obviously I'm saying to the Secret Service, they need to chill out and sit outside. And I'd ask him to bring along friends and family, because if somebody's got memory problems, they might not be very reliable as a historian. So I'd like to get some collateral history from people that know him. So all of these things together will help me come to my diagnosis. And I'm not just asking his friends and family for symptoms, I'm also trying to get a depiction of his level of functioning. So does Joe Biden need home help? Does he need nurses to come and visit him daily to give him medication? Does he need to go into a care home? Does his vice president need to step up for future geopolitical negotiations? You know, the basic stuff. And if appropriate, after all of that, sometimes I would give people with dementia anti-dementia medication. Most of them are for Alzheimer's. They don't work particularly well for other types of illnesses. And I have to say, unfortunately, they're not great medications. So they don't reverse dementia. There is no cure for dementia, but they can at best slow it down by about 6 to 12 months. That's the best case scenario. Plus they have some side effects, so they're not great drugs. These drugs are called acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So they prevent this enzyme from breaking down a substance in the brain called acetylcholine, which we need for our nerve cells to communicate with each other. So just to kind of be thorough, I'll tell you the name of some of the drugs. Donepezil, also known as Aricept, rivastigmine, also known as Exelon, and galantamine, also known as Reminil. Just in case you've heard those phrases, now you know. If you don't know, now you know, player. Okay, and then if they had like vascular dementia, then there's no treatment for that dementia, but there's certainly things that you can do to slow down further mini strokes, such as keeping your blood pressure under control, cholesterol, etc., etc. So that's decreasing the overall risk of strokes and heart attacks. And finally, I'd send Joe Biden away, and I'd want to follow him up in a memory clinic in a few months. If I thought there were problems, then I'd probably, if I thought there were no problems or his memory was quite mild, which I do think is the case, then I'd probably ask him to come back in about 6 to 12 months. If his memory problems were bad and I'd started him on some of those medications, I'd see him in about 6 to 8 weeks so that I can see how his dosage is going, whether he's got side effects, etc., etc. So to conclude, I don't think Joe Biden has dementia. There's a possibility he might be at the early stages, possibility that he's got some age-related memory loss, which is natural for an 80-year-old. If that is the case, should he be in a position of so much power? That's debatable. Let me know in the comment section below. I think he probably is okay on balance right now, but there's a risk things could deteriorate. So if I was a psychiatrist looking after him, I'd be keeping an eye out on the dude. Hope you find that interesting. Hope you find it educational. Go buy my goddamn book. How many times do I have to tell you? If you want to come see me at CrimeCon in Glasgow, I'll be giving a talk and you come and say hello. If you want a ticket, use the code PSYCH for 10% off. I'll put the links in the details below. Until next time, stay euthymic, and whatever happens, do not forget, I love you.